Tuesday, week past on Sunday, that was when the election is. I was there for 8 days. I was there last Monday, and a bit of me feels as if I was never there, because I'm home a week, you know. I was only there 8 days. But to put it in context, it's the election of the most left-wing radical government that Europe has seen since the 1930s. There hasn't been a government as left-wing radical as this since the Spanish Republican government in the 1930s, which then was attacked, as you know, by Franco, and it led to the Spanish Civil War. And I think the key question that arises is how, in this day and age, does a country like Greece, 11 million people, European country, elect a government of communists, Maoists, Trotskyists, socialist revolutionaries, ecologists, environmentalists? And the answer is, there's two sides to it. First of all, the Greek economy and Greek society is absolutely on its knees. It doesn't compare to Scotland. And I say that not because we don't have poverty here and inequality and impoverishment, but I say it to make clear that in the context of where they're at, that's an important part of why they decided to do what they were doing. And I'd never been to Athens before, so I arrived there. By the way, without advertising who I went with, I flew from Edinburgh to Athens for 35 quid, Sunday morning, right? And I flew back from Athens on a different cheap airline for 45 quid. I get to London, and the train from London to Edinburgh cost me 85 quid. It was dearer to come in the train than it was to go both ways, but that's...
You just go on spec?
No, the citizens of this left-wing party, the Radical Coalition, they invited me over, right, so I knew I was going about a week or two beforehand. But when I arrived in Athens airport is brand new. They built it for the 2004 Olympics, so it wasn't even there. Brand new airport. You get out the airport, like a brand new airport, they've got a new metro. Brand new metro, lovely, fresh, clean, airy, wide, big. I lived in London for 10 years, and it puts London's underground in the bin, man, because London's underground's dark and it's dirty and it's like vandalised and all that. Obviously I've been there 100 years. But it's a false picture, because when you get into the centre of Athens, you come out where I was staying, where the hotel was, a place called Syntagma Square is where the Parliament is. So you come out of this metro station, it's a beautiful, huge, big, yellow and white painted Parliament building. It's called the Vuli, they call it the Vuli, what we would call Westminster. And that's beautiful, and you turn round and wow, my God, it's like Baghdad or Beirut. It's like burnt out buildings, derelict shops with the steel shutters brought down, and the steel shutters are vandalised. There's rough sleepers everywhere, there's folk begging. You know, there's been deflation, the prices have fallen for 22 months consecutively because people are getting no money to buy things. So I walked along, I think it was on the Monday, towards the Bank of Greece, which is a huge big building in the centre of Athens, a bit like the Bank of England in London, Threadneedle Street, it's in this financial district. So this huge big building, as you'd imagine, fairly typical banking centre, and the shops all next to it are all empty, all derelict, all closed down. And this one, I took a picture and sent it to the Evening News for an article I had there. And the shop right next to the Bank of England, it's all, you know, closed down, steel shutters, there's rough sleepers, there's folk begging, and the graffiti on the wall, it's obviously in Greek, but I had it translated for me, and it basically says, it was my neighbour that did it. And a big arrow pointing at the bank, right? And what you find is with a lot of the shopkeepers, really impoverished, what happened, they've been shopkeepers their whole life. They can't afford to run the shop anymore. The shop's closed down, they've gone bankrupt, and what they do is they put a pasting table out where the shop used to be, and they sell what it is they used to sell in the shop. So they bring that, maybe it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're there at 11 o'clock at night. You know, it's on wheels. That's what you see everywhere, do you know what I mean? And one of the things, just as a humorous aside, they have this pita bread, and they put, you can have pork or chicken or beef in it, and there's chips and there's salad and all. It's delicious, really filling, and they call it a gyro. It's called a gyro. So I had some of the people for the Radical Independence campaign arrived in Athens the Saturday before the elections, and I was saying, how's it been going and what's it like and all that. I'm saying, man, it's brilliant. I says, who says you can't live in a gyro? I'm having one every day. A gyro and a can of Fanta was €1. Oh, that's what it cost you, €1. And it's beautiful, pita bread, good and smashing stuff. Ideal for your lunch, right? Without advertising it, right? It's probably not very good for you, but anyway, that was €1. Everything was cheap as chips. And I think what you saw was the sort of economic facts and figures that you'd heard about. The economy is shrunk. It just shrunk since 2008. It's shrunk wages are cut in half, the state pension was cut in half, the national minimum wage was cut in half. And by the way, Greece was probably one of the poorest countries in the European Union at the time. So they're down to something like €380 a month. That's the state pension. And the national minimum wage is similar. You know, they also have this thing in Greece.
Colin, what's that to the pound?
Well, there's
Roughly.
like 75 pence, the euro is 75 pence, so it's 3/4 of that. It's 3/4 of 400, so it's £300 a month. That's what they've got.
No,
You pay for everything. And one of the things that was pointed out to is, if you're not working, you can't get access to their health service. It's based on your insurance. So if you pay for it, you know, when you're at work, you have to do full-time work and you pay for your insurance and they give you a card. As soon as you lose the job, or even if you go part-time, you don't get that card. So the health service in Greece doesn't treat you. So folk, hundreds of thousands of folk are turning up and turned away. The lab can't treat you. There's various voluntary schemes run by charities, and Syriza's involved in one. You'd imagine there's lots of them springing up, right? And that's a feature of it. And the other thing is, Greece, unlike Scotland, doesn't have oil or anything like that. And despite the fact I was in Athens in January and I was saying, I phoned up Zilla, my wishes, and she says, what's it like? I says, well, I tell you what, Athens will be nice when it's finished. You know, the ruins and all right. And I says, the other thing, it's January and it feels like June. You know, just walking about my Scotland strip and everything. But they were pointing out to us in the north of Greece, up with the border with Albania and Bulgaria and that, it's perishing. They get as much snow as we do. And they're saying if what happens is the price of gas and electricity have also doubled there. So when your wages have halved and the gas and electricity doubles, you're right in stuck. So there's a lot of folk being disconnected with the power companies. Again, it's one of the parts of Syriza's programme. They're saying there'll be nobody goes without electricity. And the funny thing is, they were pointing out to me, Greece uses more electricity in the summer than it does in the winter. The country uses more electricity in the summer because it's 40 degrees. It's absolutely boiling. So you get air conditioning, refrigeration and all that kind of stuff, right? You can just about get by without electricity. In Athens, it's no cold. That was just, you know, just an ordinary sheet in bed. But if the electricity is more in the summer and you've not got the money, so they've got this massive amount of folk that have not got any electricity or access to it. You know, kids that have not been able to keep their house going and moved in with their mum and dad and they're in their 30s, etc. So the thing that overcomes you really quickly is this is really poor here. You know, the folk are really toiling. And I have to be honest with you, the other thing that struck me, I had my blue bag, you know, my yes bag, and I'm walking about with this everywhere, just carrying my stuff in it. As I had two things that struck me comparing the independence referendum to the fact that this is a highly politicised time in Greece, you know, the general election. They're thinking about the government, a lot of things in their mind. But one thing was really encouraging, the amount of people who come up to me with a bag. They clocked it right away, they knew what it was, they knew what it was about. I mean, that was just everywhere. And they come up to you, and most of the young people, I'd say under 40, they speak really good English, they get it at school. It's an affront really that we don't speak English, their language, but they speak ours. And they come out, if this happened to me once, it happened to me 100 times a day, and they go, oh, you know, Escocia. Ah, yeah, I'm from Scotland, it's Scotland, cheersy and that. And they went, how? And they're going, how did one person vote no? We don't understand how a single person would have voted no. You know, they just didn't get this kind of concept about why would anybody vote to no vote for independence, you know. And I had to find myself saying, look, I'll tell you quickly, but I'm not here to talk about Scotland, I'm here to listen to you tell me about Greece, right? But I'll tell you, my sense is, that referendum, there was a no vote, there'll be another one along shortly, and this time we win it by a landslide. So that's, you're right about, you know, that question you raise is perfectly pertinent. But you know the other thing that struck me, given that we came through September with the referendum, there was energy, there was excitement, there was passion, there was an 85% turnout. In the Greek election last Sunday, passed on Sunday, the turnout was 60%. And one of the things you recognise really, they're downtrodden, they're despairing, they're depressed. There's a real sense of they've been stood on, they're humiliated, they've lost their dignity. Folk will say that to you all the time. We just feel as if we've been, you know, really humiliated as a people with no self-worth. We've been brutalised by the Troika. We've two sets of governments that just laid their Brit into us. And Syriza's main slogan was, hope is coming, Greece is advancing, Europe is changing. And that's what won them the election, the sense that there is hope, but an awful lot of people weren't buying it. they've given up hope long time ago. They're like that, absolutely done. And so I was saying this to a lot of the meetings I spoke at since I come back. The energy in Scotland was palpable. It was electric. It was, everybody in their opinion vibrant about it. But in Greece it wasn't like that. They voted for Syriza, and the second feature of why I think the victory was occurred is because 2008, when the crash happened, they voted for PASOK, which is the Greek Labour Party. And PASOK got 44% of the vote in 2008. They had a massive majority. And the week past on Sunday they got 4%. So they went from 40-44, and actually PASOK itself split in two, and the other breakaway party only get 2%, led by this guy Papandreou. And Papandreou, this leader of this party, Papandreou is the grandson of Andreas Papandreou, who came back in the 1980s and established the first PASOK government. So he's got that kind of Kennedy, family tradition, and he got 2%, wiped out, and then so PASOK won in 2008, and they basically implemented all these cuts. They were the ones who cut all the electricity, cut the wages, laid off 1 million people, watched 1 million young Greeks leave the country. So the population fell by 1 million because they came here, they went to London, they went to America, they went to Australia. The second biggest Greek city in the world is Melbourne. There's 2 million Greeks now living in Melbourne. And there was a Greek community there before, so they went to where they had family maybe. But the 1 million have left. There were only 11 million to begin with, and are now down to 10 million. And so they tried PASOK, and they battered them royally. And then they turned to the Tories equivalent, which is called New Democracy, and they were elected in 2010. And they were the ones who just got heaved out. Samaras is their leader, and he was the one who said he closed down the television station, the state broadcasters. They basically let the oligarchs pay no taxes, etc. Mere taxes, so their wages are falling, and they're introducing all these extra taxes on things that you're supposed to pay, So it's absolutely crisis, and that's the reason why they're turned to Syriza, this hard-left radical option, because they've exhausted all the other avenues. This wouldn't have been their first choice, and it's because of the material circumstances they're in. And to add to all their woes, the thing to bear in mind about Greece, I suppose, two things. First of all the people fleeing from Syria, for Iraq and for Africa. In that part of the world, the first part of Europe you come across is Greece. So they've now got, I think it's like 500,000 desperate immigrants coming into the country. The Syrians, that's a civil war, it's a disaster zone. Iraq's a disaster zone. And what happens is they're getting out. The first country they come to is Turkey. Turkey's not in the EU. And Turkey's a massive monster of a country, huge. The Turkish government buses them straight across to the very other corner of Turkey and puts them in boats across to Greece. So you've got a country absolutely knackered, and you've got people from all, the Middle East, people absolutely nothing, and gangsters have taken their money out of them to get them to there in the first place. So they're coming, they're destitute, and most of their off sleepers, you see, have got black faces, or they're clearly, they're Middle Eastern people, you can tell, and they've got absolutely nothing in a country that's going on. And one of the beefs that Greece has got, the European Union signed this treaty. It was signed in Dublin. I can't remember the name of the treaty, but it basically says that anybody who arrives at the borders of Europe and seeks asylum has to be given it. I think that's a good thing. But the trouble is, it was signed in Dublin. You're not likely to arrive in Ireland, first of all, from Syria, are you?
No.
You're not likely to arrive in Scotland if you're coming from Baghdad. And for darkest Africa, you get to the top and you just get across the Mediterranean as quick as you can. Stands to reason it'll be Italy or Greece that you hit on first. And so they're saying, we're getting no money, we've got 500,000 folk, what are we supposed to do with them, etc. I don't know, that's another catastrophe that's landed on them just at a time when they didn't want it, So that's the context. And the other thing I'd offer you, Syriza is a party that's made up of 19 different groups on the left. It's called the Coalition of the Radical Left. So it's a coalition that brought together 19 different groups on the left. And in Scotland and everywhere else where the left is disunited, people look at it and they go, that's brilliant, wish we could do that, and I think that's fair. But it's also worth bearing in mind that on the Sunday of the election, there was still 5 other left choices in the ballot paper, and the biggest with them was the Greek Communist Party. So the Greek, Syriza got 149 MPs, the Greek Communist Party were 4th, so Syriza were first, the Tories were second, the fascist party Golden Dawn were third, marginally ahead of the communists. And the Greek Communist Party, I think, is a really interesting phenomenon, because I don't think coming from Scotland or Britain you understand mass communist parties. And the key to it is that Greece was occupied by the Nazis in the Second World War, just in the same way that Italy was and France was and the Balkan countries, you know, the former Yugoslavia. The Germans occupied Greece. And what happened is, just as like the other countries, they were absolutely ruthless with anybody who dared resist them. In Greece, what happened is that the country, the right wing basically collaborated. They took all the civil service job, they became the Greek Prime Minister. They collaborated as they did in France, in Italy and the Balkan countries. And in the resistance was led by the left, the socialists, the trade unionists, and in particular the Communist Party. So the Communist Party in Greece fought against the Nazis, and along with the Allies, shifted the Germans out. They got routed, didn't they? Unfortunately for Greece, unlike in Spain, or rather Italy and France and the Balkan countries, when you consider where Greece is, it's right at the bottom of the Balkans. Its neighbours are Albania, Macedonia and Bulgaria. So it's a Balkan country all intents and purposes, isn't it? End of the Second World War, Churchill, Stalin and Roosevelt divide up the world, and Greece goes with Britain and America. And they basically, Britain and America say, right, you're going to rebuild your country, but the deal is, the Communist Party is illegal. You're not allowed to be in the Communist Party. They banned the communists, the socialists, the trade unionists. That was the price America said for rebuilding the Greek economy. The communists were illegal. So the Communist Party, having got rid of the Nazis, led the resistance in Greece, then found themselves considered, I mean, it's ironic because they had a thing on the telly just the other day about Churchill's 50 years since his funeral, wasn't it? And I'm from Motherwell. I was brought up in a tradition that understood Winston Churchill was no friend of mine. I remember an old guy I used to know, Johnny Duffy, he's long dead now, and Johnny was demobbed for the army and happened to be in London when the election was on 1945. And so he's been away, I think he was in North Africa or something, comes back to London, the election's on, and he's going along through the East End of London with some lassie. Anyway, and Churchill comes along in an open top motor in the election campaign, and they're pelting him with rotten fruit and all that, and all buckets of stinking old milk and that thrown over him, giving him the fingers and all this. And he's like, jeez, wait, this is the guy that led us through the war. And the whole essence was, by 1945, the country's view was, we're not going back to the way things were before the war. He was before the war, you know, he was a Tory and he's a Liberal, we're not going back to the way this war's got to be for something. Anyway, in Greece, Churchill's no loved either. No. The Communist Party has maintained, you know, a very sizeable proportion, tends to be older people and a family tradition as well. So the new Greek Prime Minister, this guy Alexis Tsipras, his family were communists. His grandparents were under resistance. His mum and dad were in the Communist Party. He grew up in Athens and he joined it when he was 16 and he was one of the leaders of the Greek Communist Party. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, you know, all the different splits, didn't you? So Syriza really came out of all that tradition as well. So I suppose what I'm trying to present to you, although it's a coalition of 19 different parties and it was established in 2004, at one and the same time it's got a tradition that goes back 70 or 80 years through various people, you know. And the last thing I'd say just to offer you is, I got to know them. What happened is the Radical Independence Conference, it was the same, remember the rally that Nicola was speaking at in the Hydro?
They were in the,
So we were next door in the Armadillo here. And so there was a speaker there for the Syriza, and there was a speaker from Podemos and various other places in the world, you know, giving it Catalonia, the Basque Country, Galicia, all over, who are fighting for their independence, and so they come and they speak. And I met this woman, Mirto, I kept in touch with her, and the Greek election was called by the fact that Greek has a president, but it's entirely a nominal position, and it's elected by the MPs in the Greek parliament. But they need to have a 2/3 majority. The guy who is the president needs to have the support of 2/3 of the MPs. Now, the New Democracy Party didn't have a majority. And even with the support of PASOK and a couple of the parties, they only had a bare majority. So Syriza's decision was, we're going to precipitate election by no supporting this guy, who's one of the New Democracy people anyway. So they sort of precipitated the election on that basis. So you knew it was coming. You knew for about December there was going to be an election. And so Syriza invited the Scottish Socialist Party to come over for 3 reasons. First of all, because they knew they were going to win, they were really confident they were going to win. And to be fair, just like the polls tell us through 2 years we were not going to win the referendum, the polls in Greece were the same, telling them they were going to win it, and they won it. Actually, their margin of victory was slightly bigger than the polls by about 2%. So they knew they were going to win it, and they said the two other reasons we want you to come is because we need closer links between the Scottish Socialist Party and Syriza, and the Scottish Socialist Party and all these different left groups across Europe, because their conclusion is they've only been able to do this on their own. You know, they're basically going to the, you know, the most powerful financial institutions in the world and saying, see that 160 billion quid, 160 billion euros that you lent us, we're not paying it back, we've not got it, we can't pay it. And you and I are going to have to sit down and say, right, scrap that, different terms on the rest, here's a chance to grow our economy and you've got a chance to get something back, right? But with that albatross on our neck, we're humped. And, you know, we've all been there. These people, you know, they wouldn't give you the sugar out their tea. The idea that they're going to give you £160 billion is not at all likely, it's not at all a given. And I think Syriza are well aware that they'll negotiate, and they'll have to see what the negotiations bring. And if there's enough, they'll try and sell it to the people of Greece and try and build their economy on that basis. And if it's not enough, their conclusion is, well, we're out the euro, we're off. If you're saying that albatross stays around your neck and there's no option, well then our option is we're going to leave. It's not what we want, it's not what the people of Greece want, it's not what you want, but if that's the option you leave us with, that's what we're going to do. And one of the things that Tsipras, the guy who's the leader of Syriza, says, he reminds everybody in 1953, and this is the major thrust of their political argument, their rationale behind why they should get 160 billion written off, right? It's two sides to it, but the first side of it is, in 1953, the Allied powers, Britain and France and America, the countries that won the war, wrote off all Germany's debts.
Right.
All its debts for World War II were wrote off, and they were a damn sight bigger than 160 billion's equivalent now. And their conclusion was, we're writing off these debts because they'll never get paid, and you've got to give Germany the chance to grow again. You've got to give them a fresh start, a blank sheet of paper. Now, knowing what we know, you'd have to say that was a pretty clever decision. Germany's now potentially the world, you know, third or fourth most powerful economy in the world. They would never go to there with all the debts still hanging around their neck for 60 or 70 years. And so they said, right, we'll write them off, start afresh, we'll invest in the country, try and build it afresh. That was clever. And it was also based on the experience. They weren't going to make the same mistake they made after World War I. Whereas they humiliated the Germans. They took large parts of Germany into France and the Ruhr Valley. They took big parts and gave them to Poland. They humiliated them. Remember the things you used to see in the telly about folk going with a wheelbarrow full of million mark notes to buy a roll in the morning, etc. And that led to the rise of Hitler. So in 1953 they says, right off the debts, give Germany a fresh start, and it stops the likelihood of World War III happening anytime soon, right now. So as soon as I argue, it was right to do that for Germany in 1953, and you should do the same for Greece now. Because what eventually happened in 2008, the banks collapsed. They were all privately owned, just like here. And the government stepped in with all this public money to bail out private banks. So the punters, who weren't the ones who are guilty of committing the crime, are the ones who are doing the time, so to speak. You know, that's what makes them angriest about it. It's just so unjust. We've been absolutely paranoid, hammered to hellfire with something we never did, humiliated for the best part of 10 years, and no prospect. And if there's anything about you, your idea is how do you get out of the country? You know, so it's all the young ones, all the bolters, they've come to Scotland, they've gone anywhere else, because their conclusion is there's no future for us in this country. That's a desperate conclusion to draw, you know, that you're just going to leave the country. And I think that's the sort of scenario that you've got there in Greece. And so when you look at it in the cold light of day, they've won the election, and I was saying this to them, I can't help but tell you, you know, it looks like to me, winning the election was the easy bit. Now you've got to take on the Troika, now you've got to get these oligarchs who own the big shipping, you know, Greece is a big merchant country, and you've got big media tycoons, they don't pay any taxes. Their attitude is, for the 1950s, this country belongs to us, we don't pay taxes, what would you pay taxes? That's like giving money yourself. So their attitude, totally contemptuous. And the other thing they've got to deal with is that the Greek security services long been infiltrated by the right wing. You know, so there was a military junta till 1974, and the military, they weren't kind of, oh, it's a democracy, we take our instructions for the MPs and the Parliament and, you know, the sort of elected members. No, their attitude is, we do what we like, you stay out here. You know, the police are armed out there, there's real friction between the police and civil society. Not so much the army, funny enough, because the army you've got conscription, so you're in for 2 years and you're out again. But with the police, it's almost a state within a state. And you've also got a Greek state that's extremely resistant to Syriza. You can vote where you like, we're no changing kind of thing, you know. And a lot of that existing Greek state are PASOK people, and PASOK folk in for life, and their rent is 3 bob notes, you know, they just, you didn't, you know, just you gave somebody a bung and something got done for you. You didn't go through the channels, you didn't fill out forms, etc. So there's an awful lot of things that they've got to address there, you know. And they are big, big challenges. Winning the election, I think a lot of people in Greece that I mentioned before, the ones that are despairing, I think they're not that different for us here. In similar circumstances, we'd say, okay, fair enough, get a good shot and all that. We'll give you a certain amount of time. But see if you've not delivered. If you've not delivered, you know, doubled the national minimum wage that you said you were going to, doubled the state pension, reconnected folk to electricity, provided food, you know, and reflated the economy, then there isn't a loyalty that goes back 100 years. You know, they're not going to die in a ditch for them. They'll go for somebody else.
Recall.
And I think that's the circumstances we're in just now. So you're in an interregnum, it's a period where they won it last week, they'll be given a certain honeymoon, and then tick, 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 tick. If they don't start delivering, then you'll see support going to somewhere else, right? I think that would be my conclusion. So, there enough, that's enough for me to speak on. Happy to give you answers to any questions you've got about it.
Will they, if they leave the euro, will they have to do a referendum on it? Or can the government do it themselves?
Well, funny enough, today I was having lunch with Jim Sillers over at Craigmillar Park, and I was saying, Jim,
Just name dropping by
and I was saying,
No, Jim.
leaving the euro, that surely can't make sense. You think if you leave the euro, let's say, you know, you put it in your rate terms, like, so I owe Michael 160 billion, and I'm like, I'm not paying you, shove it, I'm not going to pay my debts, right? Then, if I have a euro entitled to go, well, I'm not lending him any money. He never paid Michael off. Why should I lend him a quid? Why, you know, they're going to do the same with me. That's what's on my mind, that you leave the euro and what, you go back to the drachma? Who's going to take that off you? Who's going to, and the Greek economy is knackered. So they're going to have to borrow money in the first instance from somewhere. They import most of their food. You know, Greece is one of the countries where they have these land laws. The relationship between land and ownership is, the father has 2 laddies. The father's got a farm, and he passes half of it to one laddie and half of it to the other. Usually the daughter's got nothing. But anyway, the one son gets, so they have 2 wee farms, where there was one big one. They then do the next. They've been doing that for 100 years. So folks' farm is a couple of olive trees and an orange grove. That's not going to compete with the, you know, the bigger agri-businesses in the rest of Europe. It's not a basis for the future. So they're going to have to import all their stuff. And you're thinking, all right, so who's going to, where are you going to get the money to import this stuff? But Jim's conclusion is, there's all sorts of shysters waiting there to lend you money on the basis that you'll pay them back. You know, it's like the Chinese will lend them money, the Russians will lend them money, the Yanks will lend them money, the British will lend them, you know, they'll lend you money on the basis of saying, right, provided you pay us back, you can start afresh. And that actually might be something in that, mightn't there?
So are they making any repayments to Europe?
They're making repayments just now, aye.
So they want to cut that,
Yes.
take whatever.
But the repayments just now, they got 250 billion to bail out the banks, and that was what 250 was. And then at the time, you probably don't remember it, I didn't remember it so very well, but what happened is that Greece threatened to default, and it was like a tug-of-war team, only in reverse, where Greece is the last man in the tug-of-war team, right? And you're about to fall off the cliff, drag everybody in your team down way. So they gave them another 69 billion to keep them going. So see that 250 billion, you've got to pay that back. That's to bail out your banks and stabilise it. Now to provide food and, you know, all these basics for your population, there's another 69 billion. And the funny thing is, in a week's time, they're due to get another 13 billion for the Troika, as they call them, right? The way that programme of disbursement went, the first thing that happens is that Angela Merkel and the ECB are supposed to agree, I think it's on the 15th of February, 13 billion as part of that 69 pro. So
Yeah,
they've been paying
yeah.
back the 69 billion, but they've not paid a penny piece back of the 250 million. And they had, their leverage was, we can't buy it, we've not got it. And we haven't got enough to feed their, population. So they gave them another 60 now. It's almost like going to Wonga. It's like the worst customer Wonga's go into. I know I borrowed 250 billion, I blew it on the horses at Musselburgh, any chance of another 69 million. And they gave them it because the whole thing threatened to come.
So you think your average Greek sit like here, but you get a lot of rich bankers and things like that don't pay taxes? It's the same there, but the poor people are suffering that. It's easier to take money off if you're, I don't know, if you're a teacher and you're paid with the state, it's easier to take money off a teacher than it is to try and get it off a banker.
As the only people that pay taxes in Greece are the poor, as working folk. And they're furious at the German propaganda machine is saying, look, you borrowed the money, you had the good times and all that, you went wild with it, now you've got to pay your dues. And the Greeks are saying, what money? We didn't get a penny piece yet. We didn't have a weekend in Blackpool or that, blow it all, we never seen a penny piece. You're asking us to pay for something we didn't spend in the first place. And if you've got a beef with all the oligarchs and all that, fine, go after them, we'll come with you, get them to pay taxes, because they stashed it on Swiss bank accounts.
Is there nothing like the International Monetary Fund or that? Would they not be prepared to put money in?
The Troika is made up of the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the EU, so they're the ones that are after the money. It's interesting, last Friday, Mark Carney, who's the Governor of the Bank of England, he came out and he basically said, look, you have to negotiate with Greece and you're going to have to write all this out because the markets have already factored it in. Everybody in the world knows you're never going to get that money back. So the markets have already factored it in. That's already priced in.
The important thing the really interesting thing is how the notion of debt relief, of not being able to pay your debts, and a creditor looking at that and saying, well, okay, I'm not going to screw you in the ground, I'm not going to kill you. That's an extremely capitalist notion. Debt relief, things like IVs and CVAs, they're not socialist notions. They're capitalist ones. Like somebody going, you've got your hands on your throat, I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to let you breathe a bit, so you can work for me. And insisting that debts are paid in full, that's a political decision, not a capitalist one. That's somebody saying, well, the boss here, I'm going to fucking kill you. So that's a really interesting tension, isn't it? That it's not a bank financial thing. Banks do not destroy the people who owe them money. It's stupid. It's not a capitalist thing to do. There's no advantage in that. So I'm interested to hear what you think is behind that kind of power play.
I think you're absolutely right. The banks write off money every day of the week, don't you? Absolutely. I mean, I was writing something.
It's priced in at the outset is the thing. That what you do is when you sell a batch of loans, you look ahead, you price it, and you go, probably you won't quite manage, you're good. Then you price it at the outset, they've done that.
And you also, you factor all these in the interest rate that you set in the first place.
Well, that's it, that's the price. So the factor
I think they're looking at it, they're going, I think the banker, the sort of capitalist, as you rightly say, would say, right, this guy owes me £1 million. I can take him to court, go after him, and end up with hee-haw, accept bills to my side, or I can say, right, tell you what, let's settle $500,000, pay back $500,000 per 20 years, at least I'm getting something. So you better be 50% of something than 100% of nothing. So you're absolutely right on the capitalist side. On the political, what's happening is Germany, or the European Central Bank, because it's no Germany, the European Central Bank is basically saying to Greece, we're playing hardball with you here, because we're terrified that if we give you, then we have to give Spain, then we have to give Portugal, then we have to give Italy, then we have to give Ireland, because to a lesser degree, but they're in the same boat, The Spanish economy is the next to knackered after Greece, and the Italians is the next to knackered after that. The Irish, they've been far too, they've applied themselves too well. They've driven 1 million people out of their country, brought down public services that they paid, the Irish have been the lapdogs of the ECB, maybe that's the wrong word, I don't want to besmirch them, but they've decided to pay off the debts quicker than they needed to, right, to get, on side of therapy. You're right, it's a political decision, because they're saying the last thing we want is the political reputation for being soft. Oh, you can lend to us, but you don't pay it, we don't care. And that actually cuts against the kind of German, the German psyche is about, you should pay your debts. the sufficiency, that kind of thing. And Angela
Except, of
Merkel,
course, as you said, they didn't in 53.
Yeah,
They also
absolutely. They don't want you to know that, do they?
away from that.
they don't want you to know there's a more social democratic way of, and in emergencies you intervene. Of course you should. You should intervene if things go pear-shaped. You don't just let it continue to poison the whole water stream, do you? You intervene, you stop it, you cauterise the wound, and you say, right, instead of losing your whole leg, you lose a couple of toes or something. You know?
So what's the scope of, I think a really interesting question for me is, what's the scope of this Syriza type thinking infecting Britain, where, you know, this deficit thing is waved around and they say, no, you've got to be poor because there's a deficit. And people kind of, you get the sense that there's a sort of cringe that people go, do I have to, oh God, okay,
Yeah.
I'll put up with that.
Well, I think it's an open question, really. You're thinking to yourself, is this the start of something, or is this an exception? You know, at the weekend there, they did a massive demonstration in Madrid. In Greece, they have this thing, the election rules are, every political party is standing each on a different day, but each of them gets live broadcast on all these TV stations. So on the Thursday night, Syriza being the official opposition, that was their night. The Friday night, Samaras was the government, that was his night. Friday night and midnight is the end of campaigning. Saturday's a flat day and you vote on the Sunday, right? So on the Friday, Samaras is live on all the TV stations. His rally, a 45-minute speech, right? And it's obligatory, they've all got to cover it. On the Thursday night was the Syriza one. And I was there, it was a big square in Athens, there was about 80,000 people there. And Tsipras invited this guy, Pablo Iglesias, to come over and share the stage with him. This is the leader of the Demos, right at the end, and surprised everybody. It was fantastic. It was like being at a rock concert and some legend walks out to jam with the last half an hour of the show and all that. And it was indicative of their idea is, Greece, Spain, the same thing. I mean, Podemos is ahead in the polls in Spain. If things keep the way they are, clearly they can change by November. But if the polls are right in Spain, you're talking about another radical left-wing government being elected in Spain, and entirely the same cocktail of what's going on. The economy's knackered, they've tried everything else. Half the kids in Spain are unemployed, it's 65% in Greece, right? Brutal. It's almost like you see somebody under 25 with a job, and they're a celebrity, because they've got a job, So the question is Syriza's election peculiar to Greece? Is this anti-austerity, anti-neoliberal, anti-the-bank message finally percolating into something profound, as opposed to what we say here is somebody puts a brick through Fred the Shred's window? There's a demonstration of the anger that's widespread, So I think it's distilled somewhere in Greece. It may well distill somewhere in Spain, and then the question is, how much does that come here? How much does the idea of Germany, how much do you say, actually, these so-called masters of the universe are the ones who are getting us into every bloody hole we're in. These people who think they're untouchable, who've done exactly the same thing in Britain now in 2015 that they did prior to 2008. I mean, the British economy is speculating in London. Whose prices again? That's all that's happening, isn't it? The so-called growth in the economy, house prices in London up another 13% last year. And it's nuts.
What would you see then as the nucleus that it could condense around in Britain? What are the kind of groups that you would think?
Well, that's a good question. I mean,
I'm starting to think of any. There was Occupy.
Yeah.
That almost kind of took off.
Yeah, but the trouble with I think the key thing is Syriza is a political party. That for me, I think as political activists, parties are important. Parties are the distillation of certain ideas, and there's an organisation around about a party.
But don't the people have to get at the stage that they've got to in Greece to start looking at that? Because people are quite happy, if you can buy your, 24 cans of beer at the weekend and sit and watch the telly and you're not starving that, but when you can't buy food and you go to another level. So I think that's the thing, isn't it?
I think you have to say that's a conclusion you're forced to draw, aren't you? It's only when people are absolutely rock bottom they decided to have a go. And even
but then they start to see that what they've taken for granted all their life isn't the only way. That there is another way.
But even then it's complex, and we're at a situation where Greece has been pressed down and pressed down and pressed down, and they've elected Syriza as an expression of we've had enough. But 40% didn't do anything. It's almost like they've been destroyed, they've been broken by it. They didn't do any fight back, they didn't vote, they didn't participate, And I think in the Occupy movement, I watched it with some interest, but I also thought it was ephemeral. I was like that, because remember they had the Occupy movement in St Andrews Square.
Yeah.
And I'd go round and talk to them and say, in what sense is a tent in St Andrews Square occupying anything? I don't get it. I don't see what I might be ignorant, but I don't understand what pressure you think you're applying in the Royal Bank of Scotland's headquarters at Golgarburn, for example, with your tent on a bit of grass in the city centre. And it was the same way St Paul's. And I always
So
thought,
it's worse than that. The headquarters in 280 Bishopsgate in London.
well,
Should have been there.
But funny enough, I'll tell you, at the time of the Occupy movement, I was standing for the rector of St Andrews University, and Michael Forsyth was one of the other candidates.
Right.
And he's a rogue, Michael Forsyth. He's a right nasty bastard, honestly.
He likes you as well.
He likes me, but he says about, he talked about there was an aerial photograph taken of the tents outside St Paul's Cathedral. And so what he was saying was, the aerial photograph, what do you call those?
Oh, the infrared cameras.
Infrared camera, and there was nobody in any of those tents. They'd all went home at night time when it got cold, they kind of left it. I don't know if that was true or not, but his inference was, this was just play acting, this was really nothing to this, etc. Anyway, I supported the aims of the Occupy movement, but I never had any expectation to achieve anything.
So if you're
But I think a party is important.
If you're willing to ask difficult questions of the Occupy movement, I'll allow myself to ask you a difficult question. What do you think about the SNP being the nucleus for the coalesce, for the the notion of discontent and anti-austerity to coalesce around?
Well, I'll tell you, I think it's a good question. It's an open question, because I think whether the SNP likes it or not, there are a lot of people moving in that direction. There's a lot of people, drawing the conclusion after the referendum, they're joining the SNP with expectations that the SNP might have difficulty agreeing with, living up to, etc. Because it's a movement, and sometimes it's a movement. It's like, I don't sail, but I can imagine the analogy: if you're out in the sea and the wind catches you, you're going to go, your boat is going to go where that wind takes you rather than where you'd like to steer it. And I think I see that in the way things are in Scotland just now, All I'm trying to do is, I don't want to come back for Greece and say, aye, things are exactly the same in Scotland, they are. I was speaking at Stirling University last night and said, I'm not going to come here. I was there a year ago, and our presentation was, yes, Scotland could potentially be one of the richest countries in the world, left to make our own decisions. I'm not going to come here a year later and say all of a sudden we're one of the poorest, as Greece is, and therefore round the corner is a potential socialist revolution. You can't have it both ways, and I think you have to be honest and say, Scotland isn't one of the poorest countries in the world. We're not impoverished, our economy is not destroyed, we're not in the same boat, and I don't think people are ready for these conclusions yet, not to the same degree that they are. And that's why you might reasonably say, why is the left in Scotland so divided, so disparate? Where is the sign of the 19 of them going to come together? And the answer is, because those conditions don't apply that apply in Greece. And secondly, and Syriza's it's a lesson here, you can't just wish left unity. You have to agree on certain things. There has to be principle there. So I don't know if you've seen the article I wrote in the Sunday Herald, 3 pages, and the woman who deals with the features editor, Susan, said to me, look, at the end here you've said about how if there's going to be a united left in Scotland, it'll have to agree X, Y, Z, and it has to support independence. And I wrote that, and I says, yeah, it has to. There is no future for the left in Scotland if it is either ambivalent or against independence. That's not a progressive view to take. So that's but an illustration of saying we can't unite on things we don't agree with. You have to unite on what you agree with, and you have to agree on profound, the profound realities of the time. And for me, I joined the Young Socialists, the Labour Party Young Socialists in Murrow when I was 17, so you're talking about the mid-80s. And at that time, everybody in the left was against the devolution referendum. I mean, I was too young, it had taken place by then, right? But everybody in the Communist Party, the Labour left, the militant, the Socialist Workers' Party, everybody was against. Because the idea was that the British working class were powerful, strong, were in the trade union movement, they had power, they voted for the Labour Party, and independence was an irrelevance to the class struggle. I know that sounds bizarre, but that was the argument at the time. You roll forward now, there's virtually nobody in the left that didn't support independence in that referendum. Because the idea is the world had moved on. The Labour Party had moved so far to the right, it's not going to be a vehicle for socialism. The trade union movement went from 13 million to about 5 million. And more importantly, in many ways, our cultural change because of the experience of Thatcher and the poll tax and Ravenscraig and others. No longer do people consider themselves British. We consider ourselves Scottish by vast
A
majority.
lot of people feel European as well.
European, so you have to, as Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, so should your opinions. And the facts from the 1980s to 2015 in Scotland are completely different. So for my money, if you're going to build left unity in Scotland, it has to be based on certain principles. One of them is independence, redistribution of wealth, a working class party, challenging neoliberalism, challenging the austerity agenda, etc. And
Do you think it really is a working class party?
who's citizen?
No, that we in Scotland, because I always try to avoid using the phrase working class now, so I just talk about that represents working Scots. Try to avoid the word class.
Yeah.
I'm always wondering if it's something that people can agree
I think
with.
that's a fantastic discussion. That's got so many aspects to it. I mean, I was brought up working class. I'm proud of being working class, and I use the term all the time. And I insist on it because I think over the Americanisation of our language. I go to America and everybody's middle class. I'm going, middle class? What are you, the middle-y? And there it was brought in as a term to distinguish white working class people from Hispanics and blacks and the poor immigrants. You're not all the same, you're better than them. The blacks have got no rights, etc. So I very much resent my language being taken away from me. And I think what you're doing is, at this point, I think you're raising is really important because what we are having here is, it's confusion. You're bringing in confusion into the argument. I think the term working class, Marxists prefer the term proletariat because it gives it a much clearer definition. But if you were to mention the proletariat and the inch the carton to the Royal Head, you just tell Citizen Smith for the BBC show that, the bourgeoisie and those terms, I'm afraid, are a long way to go before we can bring them back.
I'm the bourgeoisie in the inch.
you're the inch bourgeoisie. But I'm I know the sociological argument that goes around behind it and it's more stratified, etc. But I'm always think with politics, my instinct is to try and keep it as simple as it can possibly be and not unnecessarily complicate it. And I don't buy that we're all middle class. I think.
No, really, I wasn't saying that.
I know you don't, but I'm saying that's often the terms of the debate, isn't it?
I think I'm working class Glasgow, but I think that phrase comes from the days when you left school, you were guaranteed a job, everybody worked.
Yeah.
The only people that never worked. And so you could consider yourself working class and you've never worked in your life. Do you know, if you ask maybe somebody in England their definition of middle class and somebody up here's definition of middle class, they have two very different definitions. And I think, I agree with you, in my head I've got my vision of what that is, but I think loads of other people don't have the same idea as me.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I take that as a challenge. I challenge them to change their view back. It's like politics is often about challenging people. I'm sometimes reluctant to use it nowadays. I still do because I get over my reluctance because I think people who are not working, people who are unemployed or on benefits or pensioners or students who are not working might be alienated by it. But for me, they're all part of it. I don't make that distinction in my head. I consider everybody in the inch working class. Class comes to me, it's a relatively easy concept. I grew up in Motherwell. I go to university, I remember going to university, Strathclyde University, and I'd never ever met anybody who'd never voted Labour in their life. The only people in Motherwell who didn't vote Labour voted Communist. Motherwell had the first Communist MP, the Communist councillor when I was there. I go to university and I meet kids from other backgrounds and that, and they'd say they voted, so this is the 80s, maybe. Actually, I think the first couple of people met from Coatbridge and they told me that they voted Liberal or something like that. I remember thinking, well, they don't follow politics very well, the Coatbridge and you're voting Liberal must have been. And then, my mates would be, the SNP history of it was 13 MPs in the 70s, 11 or 13?
11.
So, in Motherwell, the SNP were still considered tartan Tories. They were considered, there was all that James Callaghan stuff about these were the turkeys who voted for Christmas. That was legendary. That was just, you're fed on that kind of stuff in the Labour Party Motherwell, But remember, this is a town with the Ravenscraig Steelworks, with the Clyde Alloy Steelworks, with the DL Steelworks, with the Clyde Bridge Steelworks. It was a company town. You know, and that kind of sense, you know, my family still live there. It's an entirely different tradition altogether now. But you know, I think I don't want to sound like some dinosaur stuck in time about the term working class, but I still think it offers you a compass to understand the way the world
You
is.
know, I was just thinking about it in terms of, you know, if the SNP was going to be the nucleus around which we all coalesce for Westminster purposes, how comfortable would they be talking about class?
I don't think any MPs going to Westminster will be dealing with that at all. Just be rabble-rousing.
Labour's always talking about working people. I don't know
They
what
don't
that
have
means.
class.
Yeah, that's a cop-out. Nobody wants to use the word class anymore.
No, that's
class. And also Blair, I was just writing a piece for an article today, and it seems to me Blair's greatest legacy was this explanation he offered that there's no such thing as ideology anymore. It's just winning elections. And I think that's actually an accurate reflection of what Blairism is. They didn't care about anything. It was just winning the election. I remember I came up from London, moved to Edinburgh in 1995. So you have the 1997 election. And I remember Donald Forrest and George Mackin, friends of mine that were in the SNP and Liberation magazine, do you remember that one? And they were adamant that there would never be another Labour government because England always voted Tory. And I was like, you have no idea what's coming. I mean, Labour is going to piss this election at the park. You know, London, way beyond London, old stretches, they've had enough of the Tories. Major won against the stream. He should have lost, and he won. So that the sort of elastic was stretched beyond its tolerance. And when they did lose, Blair had a landslide. But when you think about 1997, Blair's message was, vote Labour to get rid of the Tories.
Yeah.
It wasn't vote Labour for a positive reason. It was vote Labour for a negative reason. It was vote for us to get rid of the Tories. And the next time, vote for us again to keep them out. If you don't vote for us, the Tories get back in. And before you know it, Blair was privatising things, sending us to war, redistributing wealth from the rich, from the poor to the rich. He was in a dumps clause 4. And before you know it, he doesn't stand for anything except winning the election. And the Labour hacks will say to you, greatest leader Labour ever had, Tony Blair, won 3 elections. Yeah, he won 3 elections and sold your innards. He sold every vital organ you had. But anyway, that's...
He wants the Middle England.
He did, yeah, that can I...
I want to ask about Greece again.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Well done for reminding us.
Does the new administration have a position on NATO membership?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
They have a seat on NATO's High Command now. That was the thing that struck me flying back. That they won the government, so they've got a seat in the United Nations. So they've got a seat in the NATO High Command. They've got a seat in all the intergovernment bodies across the world. My impression is I think they've fudged it. I think, strictly speaking, Syriza would rather Greece wasn't in NATO. They take a very strong line on the Ukraine. They don't support the Western Ukraine. Their attitude is they shouldn't be there. There's a civil war going on that's being stoked and fomented by the West. You know that Ukraine is part of the Soviet, kind of region of the world. There's a very strong line on that. But I think they fudged it, and the reason I say that is, they made a coalition. They made an alliance coalition with this small Greek. They call Greek independence, largely a party of small business people who run tavernas in the Greek islands and things like that, who again have been impoverished. And the only thing they really care about, an L as they're called, is Greece's military place in the world. So it's possible they'll say, alright, you care about Greece's military, we've got bigger things on our plate than worrying about whether Greece should remain. It's 11 billion.
They worry about Turkey as well, because there's a historical enmity there.
Correct. I mean, Greece is still at war with Turkey over
Exactly.
Cyprus, remember?
Yeah.
The island's divided, so I suspect they've just, they've fudged the issue because it's a hornet's nest. If you start saying, we're out of NATO, then who's going to look after our Greek Cypriots? Turkey's a much bigger country, much bigger in many ways, much more powerful. Turkey's in NATO too. That's going on. So
I thought for some time that Greece would get out of it by basically selling themselves to NATO and getting some bases.
there's an American base in
Yeah,
Crete.
I know. I was thinking with its area, and they haven't been very successful in Turkey doing so. It might be that was the way they were thinking of getting out of it. I don't think, no, of course.
Yeah. I think it's a compromise that maybe the left isn't that comfortable with, but they've got other priorities. I mean, as far as I know, there's no nuclear bases in Greece or anything like that, Yeah, they don't have Trident's equivalent, so that's at least something. But it's good that you remind us of here talking about
Do you think they seem quite competent guys, like quite smart guys that are running Syriza? So from that point of view,
Yeah, I think they're dead impressive. Actually, the Prime Minister guy, you know, he reminds me of Jimmy Reid. He reminds me of Jimmy Reid. He's an engineer to trade. He's the first Prime Minister Greeks ever had that went to a state school. And Syriza have this rule where, just like the Scottish Socialist Party, all the MPs give 25% of their salary to the party, and they give another 25% to what's called social projects to provide healthcare. You know, to that section of the population that turned away with the Greek health service. There are all these voluntary charitable, you know, organisations. They run a lot of food banks, not as party things. You know, they fund them. It's a big social movement. Genuinely, they are one of many, you know, components of it. Right? That's what they do. But there's a tendency to think, oh, he's young guy. All the other Greek leaders are old men in suits, so pensioner age. And he's young and he looks like he's brand new. And the reason I think of Jimmy Reid, because a lot of people had this tendency to portray Jimmy Reid as a shipyard worker. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time in 1970 when Upper Clyde shipyards, etc. And people overlook the fact that Jimmy Reid was the leader of the Young Communist League in 1958.
That's correct.
He was a Communist Party full-time officer. He was with the Communist Party, rising star, articulate young guy. He started off as a stockbroker, as you know, in Glasgow, and decided he wasn't a stockbroker. But in other words, Jimmy Reid's provenance from the early 50s right through to 1971 is somehow erased by people who said, oh, he was just a shipyard worker with a gift for the gab. You know, he was a very intelligent, working class intellectual, you know. And Cyprus is the same. You know, he's not just, he's 40, he's not just turned up in a flash suit to lead a movement that was born yesterday. You know, he's he's a very clever guy. And actually, I think in the last few days, the guy that's impressed me very much is the finance minister.
He's been around, hasn't he?
He's articulate on TV, he speaks many languages, he's meeting Osborne today, they know their brief inside out, they know their strengths and weaknesses, they know the other side's strengths and weaknesses, and they're very supremely confident that they're walking this line between keeping their manifesto obligations and sending a message to the world that they will keep by their international obligations. And of course, the proviso
is...
is...
sense of what they expect to be thrown at them, because they're going to get the whole shooting match poured on their heads now, without a doubt. Did you get a sense of what they expect?
Yeah, they've been planning this a long time. I mean, they've been in the lead in the polls for 2 years. They won the European elections last year in Greece. You know, they had what they call, they had a conference in Thessalonica, and they launched their manifesto there 7 months ago. It's called the Thessalonica Declaration. But all this went into in great detail where they said, right, we're going to ask these people, not known for their generosity, for 160 billion. There are two options. They say yes, or they say no, and then start taking every single, you know, formulation after that, you know. What if they say 60 billion? What do we say then, you know? What if they say nothing? You know, at what stage do we call for handers for our pals?
I think that he's a professor of economics or something like that. Finance minister, so he's well versed.
He's been to about 5 countries already since election.
I think.
I'll be honest with you, I think some part of your Greece honesty, like I call it, depressed me a little bit. I didn't think it was quite as bad as that.
No, but it's
I genuinely, I genuinely believe though that even though Europe is shouting one way, it will actually bend their way.
Yeah,
because I think
it's in everybody's interest.
It's in everybody's interest, and I think eventually they'll come round there.
Yeah.
As the Orthodox Church, sorry.
I was just going to ask what the new administration's position on various international trade agreements that have been negotiated at the moment. There are some controversial ones between the EU and the States, for instance, and we've got a position on the TTIP.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I don't, it's possible. I wouldn't imagine giving the impression that 8 days in Greece and all of a sudden I'm an expert.
No, I just wondered because of course, you know, I think it would only take one country to not participate in something like that. And then
I think they're focused on one fight at a time. I mean, other people have to fight the TTIP thing. Greece is possibly not best place to start it.
But you'll probably, I mean, I think you're alluding to, they're probably come under a lot of pressure from the United States if things aren't going in their favour in Central and Southern America. They didn't do too well when they elected independent-minded leaders
That's what you're saying. I think they don't ever get anything for nothing. There's usually conditions attached to everything, and whether it's diplomatic terms or financial, contracts have all got these provisos in it, isn't it? So I think the thing is, Greece is only twice the size of Scotland. It's quite an intimidating thing when you think that they're taking on. They're 11 million. They're impoverished. They're not starting from a great negotiating position. For a game of poker, they'll probably need a rubbish hand. They probably want to throw in 3 of them and try and get another a pair or a better set of cards. So I think, I said earlier on that they're not under any illusions they can do this on their own. If Greece is left on its own, they'll go hammered. And that's why they're saying that all the other 4 nations, which are derogatorily referred to as the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece and Spain, the sort of basket case nations, they're saying that's got to be their first group of solidarity. And then it's the other 23 nations of the European Union, the idea that we have a morally justified case here. This can be in everybody's interest. Greece being a modern democratic country with an economy that's going forward is not just to Greece's advantage, it's to the whole of the EU, because the international speculators are seeing Greece as the weak marine, haven't they? They'll be going after him. This guy's the weak guy. If we can pin him, we'll tear the whole army down, And I think since 2010, was it? They changed the rules of the euro now. That there are rules, I think they were written in Lisbon, there are now rules that say you can get rid of one and it'll not have any effect on the rest. So you can cut, you can prune back the rose, take off that branch and it's still a rose kind of thing. But prior to that, it was all or nothing. One fell, they all fell, they'd be running them, So, are you going to answer the question?
I was just intrigued if they, because another one of the power centres in Greece, the famous ones, you've got the army, you've got the Communist Party, and the Greek Orthodox Church is definitely one of them. I just wondered if they put their toe in the water.
They did. I mean, Cyprus, the leader of the Syriza, was accused of, because they're atheists, but they have the Feast of the Epiphany is the big day in the Greek Orthodox Church where they release doves. And one of is it the Archbishop or the Pope? I don't know who's the leader of the Orthodox, but he throws things into a river and these young men die for it. It's a symbolic kind of thing, right? And there's rewards, religious rewards in the afterlife for them and that. But Cyprus was accused of opportunism by going and offering to release one of the doves. And he was saying, let everybody knows I'm an atheist, I'm a communist, I don't believe in God, but this is an attempt to make, overtures. There are people who are religious. There'll not be any religious persecution under this regime as there is with that. The thing is, there was a common phenomenon we saw with the referendum. The strategy of New Democracy in Samaras, it was scaremongering. You elect this mob, this is what will happen. It was that kind of Project Fear all over again. Every day. Samaras was getting pelters for his own supporters. This is absolutely negative. All the time it's negative. You're not saying anything about what you're going to do to lift us out of it. You're just hammering name. It's the communists, it's the Reds under your beds, they'll close down your churches, the usual predictable stuff. So even in his own party, he was getting pelters for a strategy which is negative because he thought the best way to win support for New Democracy, and actually, I'm sorry to say, there's some evidence that he made some headway. New Democracy's vote held up. It actually increased a fraction, but because what happened is that Syriza's vote came from PASOK, it came from other places other than New Democracy. So Samaras might say, okay, I lost the election, but I increased the support of the Labour Party.
Well, it just brings to mind the story. There was that guy in the referendum. There was a homeless guy who voted no. Said he voted no because he didn't want to lose what he had. The guy was in the streets, and they actually managed to frighten him and say, "Well, we'll take your street away."
It's incredible that. I campaigned last week. Since I come back, we're campaigning the SSP's in favour of a £10 living wage. The government says you need to be earning £10 an hour. And so they're saying, we're trying to get rid of 0-hour contracts and poverty wages. And people, I remember this lassie came up to sign the petition when I was in Dumfries and she worked for Starbucks. She's on £6.50, the national minimum wage for her age group, and a 0-hour contract. I would sign the petition but I'm frightened to lose my job. And it goes, what is it you're frightened of losing that you think you can't get round the corner on 100 different ones? £6.50 and a 0-hour contract. They're 10 a penny. Get them in Woolworths, Bill Yates Smith. What are you frightened of losing? But it's like, people at the bottom frightened of losing rather than seeing the sort of, reach for the stars.
Yeah, and I guess that's what has enabled that vote. When you set that very clear picture at the outset of saying there's people just in ruins and
Yeah.
it's just destroyed, I guess that's the thing.
Yeah.
There's a level you can't really scare people beyond.
And it's to, your point about how far people have fallen, I'm not sure I accurately conveyed it. Paul Mason was on from Channel 4 News and he interviews this guy. I mean, I've never seen so many taxis anywhere in the world. I've been to New York and London. The taxis are yellow. They're either Mercedes or they're Skodas, and they all seem fairly new. They're particularly yellow anyway. And Paul Mason interviews this guy. He used to be the head of broadcasting at ERT. That was the state broadcaster that Samaras closes down. It was the only voice that was kind of, neutral or objective. All the other broadcasters are privately owned and they're all, supporting new democracy. He closes down the television station, so Paul Mason tracks this guy. He's the head of broadcasting for the state broadcaster. An important job, with a lot of responsibilities. The guy's now driving a taxi in the centre of Athens, working 80 hours a week and taking home €320 a week, right? And so that gives you an idea where somebody has fallen out. Taxi driving is hard graft, as you know. I don't care where you are in the world, right? And it's not particularly well paid anywhere in the world. This is a guy who'd be earning a damn sight more than that. Seems to be with great more responsibility, the head of a broadcast, and now the only job he can get is to get a taxi and drive around and chase, tourists like myself, to go a couple of 100 yards for a couple of euros, That's, I think, a measure of how desperate it is. And I don't know what you did if in that process of decay you were a taxi driver. What you then do if you started as a taxi driver and maybe you weren't getting enough to even pay your own diesel, you're probably rough sleeping by now. That's how things have, collapsed.
Yeah,
and then you're thinking, remember, this is Europe. This is the 21st century. This is Europe. This isn't Africa or Latin America or Southeast Asia where you're almost prepared for such poverty and deprivation and impoverishment and hopelessness. And India, where you see people begging and it's desperate. You don't expect to see that in Europe.
Do you have any ideas of job sharing or anything to try and share what little wealth there is?
You do, it's common. You see people who've got 3 jobs, 7 hours.
Well, I mean sharing between people with the good jobs rather than having to take on multiple.
Yeah, I mean a lot of people do voluntary work to try and, we saw that stuff about chasing after kind of any kind of opening. And I mean, Sarah's are committed to create 300,000 jobs this year. I mean, these are programmes that are clearly desperately needed, but they're ambitious. They're hell ambitious in the context, aren't they? So, I think it's a...
What level of kind of state aid do they get? You were on about pensions, but if people are not working, how do they get food and stuff like that?
Food banks, I mean...
Is it so there's big
if
food
you're not
banks?
work, there isn't any welfare system worth anything. They get 65% unemployment amongst under 25s. There's no benefits, you don't get in. So that they're getting fed by their family or their food banks or voluntary or charities or stuff like that. I mean, Athens, the greater Athens area, the region's called Attica, 4.6 million, half the population lives, the whole country lives in and around Athens. So you'd imagine 65% of the youngsters, that's why, they've left the country. They closed down college places, they've not got the money for education, they've not got the money for anything.
It's so weird that classic capitalist, what he wants to do is have a strong middle class, because they tend to be the motors of a capitalist economy. But if they destroyed them over there, it's almost like some sort of new version of extremism, some
So is that not
crazy
just
assault.
a feature of a lot of policies at the moment throughout Europe? I think
Yeah,
you see
I
that here, that the middle, if you want
Yeah,
to
it's
call
a
it, is
weakening
getting
of that middle class. I'm just
squeezed.
wondering whether that's just an accident.
Well, that's
Or
the
whether
Herald
that's a
article I
second-
wrote, and they started off by quoting John McTernan in my mind, John McTernan, and special advisors like him will
It
say,
came through, by the way.
elections are won from the centre. Well, Sarah's are in the centre of anything. And that's patently not always true, but this is the mantra, this is the sort of great unspoken wisdom, that you, and I suspect in the 60% who voted would probably the people who vote something. I would imagine that the 40% who didn't vote weren't the middle class. You know, the middle class people with money would have been voting for New Democracy and been out there working their socks off, right? Syriza's people, probably the same, public sector workers or people that are working, even if it's only 7 hours, they're working their tatty off for Syriza. The 40% who weren't voting would be the beggars and the people with nothing, people despair and people giving up and hope and all that, you know. And they had this thing in Greece, 18, you're allowed to vote at 18. And the election being in January, summer, the government usually passes a decree each February allowing for every 18-year-old to vote that year. But because the election was on the 25th of January, Burns night, Samaras refused to allow 18-year-olds to vote. So you could be 18, but you still wouldn't have got the vote because the decree hadn't been passed. The convention is this decree is always passed in February for the year ahead, right? So Syriza and others argued that this, you know, everybody should be, who's 18 already should be allowed to vote. And they said, nah, no danger. And 100,000.
What was the coalition they had to form? Did they not get some coalition with some extreme right party?
Aye, Syriza, they formed a coalition. They're not extreme right, I wouldn't say that they're called an L, Greek independence. They're called, there's 10 of them. And I think this is, you know, to me it's quite a wise move. On the left in Scotland, it was the first sell out, they're elected in this, what's it like, typical, they're elected on a Sunday, 9 o'clock the Monday morning, they sold the jerseys by going into coalition with the right wing. And this NL party that we're talking about, they were a breakaway from New Democracy of small businessmen who felt that New Democracy weren't speaking out for them, they were speaking for the big businesses, right? So they left. They've also got a kind of angle, which is they want Greece's place in the world, that the right-wing character really comes from their kind of small business, but more to do with defence. They want more money for Greek defences, and they, you know, probably like to, you know, facilitate. Anyway, the thing is, there's 10 of them, and the reason this is important: 300 seats in the Greek Parliament. Syriza got 149. So in a way, that's tragic. The 149, and I think I learned this too. It's a very, very rare thing for a Greek government to see it was 4 terms. PASOK never did it, because they were split and fell apart. New Democracy never did it, because Syriza brought them down. It's a 4-year term. It's very rare for any government to see it the 4 years, because at any time the opposition could present a motion of no confidence. So, to my mind, if you've got 149, right away, it's like you went on holiday to Crete for your holidays and went, I left the bathroom window open. Any time a burglar can climb in my bathroom window and burgle my house in the next 2 weeks while I'm away. So this move to this NL was to get their 10. So they go for 149 where it's possible, perhaps not likely when you consider the Communist Party and the Fascists being in a coalition to bring them down, but still possible. And they moved to shore that up. That can't now happen. They've got 159. So the most the other side could get was 140, because one of them's the Speaker. So they got 140. So my feeling was this was clever because it shores up a problem, and that's not going to happen. So they've got stability there. While they're going to face the Troika, they're not worried about their own back door getting burgled.
So what deal do you think they had to do to get the money back though?
Well, on the austerity and their central problem, none at all, because this party also supports austerity. They support a hard line being taken against the central bank in the negotiations, and they have done for the last 2 years. It's one of the interesting things that Syriza on the Monday morning, so they win the election on the Sunday, 9 o'clock on the Monday morning, they've got 4 laddies outside their door as suitors. Can I take you out kind of thing, right? One was an L, one was PASOK. This PASOK got 5%, but you only need 3% to get into Parliament, so they've got 10 MPs or something like that. PASOK wanted to be in coalition with them, this an L. There's another group called Potami, and it's a new party that's set up by a guy who's a TV celebrity. And to all the world, they looked to me like Robert Kilroy Silk. Do you remember that, right? And this guy was desperate to be in, he was a kind of, apparently they portrayed him as a bit of a Blairite, you know, kind of character like that. But they got quite a number of seats, 20 or something like that. And I think there was another one. And Syriza's view was, Anel have been in coalition with us in effect when we're in opposition on these issues for the last 2 years. They're reliable, trustworthy. What they want in return is this issue of defence and NATO, and they made the guy, the leader of ANEL, the defence minister. But his problem is, there's a cabinet of 26, and there's one of him, and it's collective responsibility, so they probably think, okay, we can live with that, right? Well, Gammie's, and most Greeks consider the defence portfolio to be the sleepy hollow. You just go there and sleep for 4 years, nothing will change. You know, Cyprus is an intractable problem. You've got the NATO bases, nothing's likely to happen there of much import, you know, so that was the reason they signed the deal for it. They wouldn't touch PASOK, because they stink to the high heavens. They're the ones responsible for dragging the country into the mire, do you know what I mean? And the Potami guy, they just thought was a chancer, they didn't want to touch him. The left wingers in Scotland would say to me, well, surely the obvious one was the Communist Party. You know, the Communist Party came fourth, and they would have 30 or 40 M. Why did they not go into coalition with the Communist Party? And I'm afraid it's because the Communist Party in Greece are what would be described as hardline Stalinists. They're hardliners. They take the view that Syriza are left-wing capitalists, and they're just a passing fad. You know, they're all chancellors. Remember, Cyprus used to be in the Communist Party, so there's no love lost between them. I don't know if I'm doing them a disservice by suggesting that they would easily, you know, go into a vote of confidence against the government alongside known fascists in Golden Dawn, but there's absolutely no love lost between the two, so that was never going to be a likely coalition partnership. So I think given that they needed to get across that 150 line in the Parliament, then Anel's probably the wisest choice, given that they've had a working relationship with them for 2 years. So there you are. But I must confess, like, I've been back 8 days now and I feel as if I know less and less. So I feel as if I'm a bigger fraud than I was when I've been there for 8 days, you know, I am Aristotle and Assis, ask me a question about Greece and that. It all moves on, doesn't it? But I'll be watching it afar.
Must have been some atmosphere.
Oh, it was brilliant, it was fantastic. I mean, see the big rally they had on the Thursday night, there's 80,000, and they had this cultural difference with us. If we're having a rally or something like we did at the top of Calton Hill, you know, there's a podium facing everybody, right? Or in George Square in Glasgow, you put the stage facing into the square. No, they have the stage facing out of the square, down the streets. So they've got this huge big podium in a place called Ammonia Square, and it looks down 3 avenues. One central to you, one going away for you in that direction, and one going away for you. And I'm going, should you not have the podium facing the other way into the square? Like, he says, no, there's going to be 80,000, that square's no big enough. So they have them all there, and it's fantastic atmosphere, it's live on the telly, all the world's press are there. And they invited their international guests to stand at the front of the stage, not on the stage, because it's just him, one lectern, one man, you know, it's choreographed, fantastically well, all set to music, well lit, colour, they do the whole thing. They have state funding of political parties in Greece, so they spend a lot of
So
that.
there's so many there.
So they have all the international guests standing, there's the stage there, but in the gap between the crash barriers on the sort of front of the stage, we're all standing there. So there was somebody from Die Linke in Germany, from the Catalans in Spain, and the Basque Country, and you know, various groups sympathetic to Syriza. And I was there, and I had my Scottish Socialist Party t-shirt on and all that, and they're all taking photos and this kind of stuff, you know. And at the end of it, when Syriza, when he finished his speech, he brings on this guy Pablo Iglesias from Podemos, right? And it was fantastic, it's just really well done, it's well thought through. They've flown the guy from Madrid, big secret, big surprise, brilliant. And they take all the international guests to a social and an arts centre, no too far away, and we're having some food and drink. And I gets this tap on my shoulder, and I turn around and it's Cyprus, the guy, and he says, come, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. So I go over a few yards away, and it's this Pablo Iglesias, right, from Podemos, right? And see what's his name, Cyprus, he doesn't speak English, it's very faltering. I should complain, I don't speak any Greek anyway, but so he says, this is Pablo Iglesias, right? And Pablo Iglesias goes to me, do you know Gavin Hill? Right, and I was kind of stunned by his question. First of all, I didn't know he spoke English, right? So I goes, sorry? Like that kind of, was that, you know, it's noisy and you're not sure whether he was saying something in Spanish about it. And he goes, well, do you know Mary Hill? Right? And I goes, no, I know Gavin Hill and I know Mary Hill, but how do you know Gavin Hill? I was like, obviously, I didn't know you spoke English. And he says, I was at Glasgow University for a year doing my geography degree. He says, I love Glasgow and that kind of stuff. So we have a picture to him, we're chatting away and that. And he was saying, Cyprus was saying they're very confident they would win, you know, and that they'd hope that this would be a stimulus for Spain and that, and so we're talking briefly about Spain, and then we get to talking about independence, and I thought I'd pull his leg a wee bit, Cyprus, because I says, and I understand you didn't support Scottish independence, did you? I don't know what Scottish was, I'm like teasing him and that through the interpreter, and he says, no, we didn't take any position, and I says, well, that's not very good, is it? I mean, that's like fudging issues and that kind of stuff. And through his interpreter, he says, well, we decided that Greece is, there's the national question writ large in Greece politics with Macedonia. So you've got the country of Macedonia and you've got a region of Greece known as Macedonia, and there tends to be some friction in Greece society, and it's really an argument read by the right. They want Macedonia back into Greece and things like that. So Syriza basically ducked it because it was a big issue. If you start saying you're in favour of Scottish independence, then they'll say, well, why are you not in favour of, you know, Greater Macedonia, etc. And they thought they would just duck it, and that was the reason for it. He says, but in the context of Scotland, we thought it was the right thing, and obviously the guy Iglesias was saying, ever since he'd been in Glasgow, he was obviously strong, you know, independence supporter. So that was nice. It kind of brought me back to the international links between us, and it's nice to know that these figures, as important as they are following what's going on in Scotland, you know. So we didn't talk about it for very long because I just thought it was a bit, you know, to bring Scotland to the air rather than learn what was going on, you know, but it was grand. So I thought it was fantastic. It was a really good experience, and I'm glad I did it.
Well done, I think.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Good, Michael.
Grand.